May 30th, 2016. I'm in this book. Its copyright date is 1988. I'm on page 161. Island Universes. Go ahead and read this out to you. There were two schools of thought about the nature of the elliptical nebulae which held sway in the 19th century, so the 1800s. One, the island universe theory of Kant and Lambert, the phrases Kant's, maintained that our sun is one of many stars in a galaxy, the Milky Way, and that there are many other galaxies, which we see across great gulfs of space as a spiral and elliptical nebulae. The other, the, quote, nebular hypothesis, maintained that the spiral and elliptical nebulae are whirlpools of gas condensing to form stars, and that they are nearby and relatively small. The nebular hypothesis also had originated with Kant, but was usually called Laplacian, after the French mathematician Pierre-Simon de Laplace, who had published a detailed account of how the sun and its planets might have congealed from a whirling nebula. So right there, we have the truth of the matter. The nebular hypothesis was the idea that the spiral galaxies were actually solar systems forming, and that the central object was just the hot star that was forming, and everything else that formed around it was the byproduct of the single star forming. And you'll see why they came to this conclusion in this paragraph, and this is why I wanted to share it with you. On page 162. The hypothesis gained even more ground when time exposure photographs made by James Keeler at Lick Observatory in California in the 1890s indicated that there are a great many spiral nebulae. Keeler estimated that over 100,000 spiral nebulae lay within the range of the Lick telescope. Hundreds of thousands of new solar systems seem plausible, given the magnitude, or no, the multitude, of suns that bedeck the Milky Way. But it strained credulity to imagine that there could be hundreds of thousands of galaxies, each home to billions of stars. That's why the nebular hypothesis was kept, because when they looked out with a telescope at those little fuzzy nebulae, they could see a whole bunch of those, and they assumed, well, we see a lot of stars in the galaxy, so naturally those must be the new solar systems. But when Hubble came around and found the Cepheid variables and actually measured the distances, what happened was they realized that these weren't solar systems in formation, that they were entire galaxies, and that the incredulous understanding that these were hundreds of billions of stars per galaxy, and that there are hundreds of thousands of galaxies, that was replaced. It's just crazy, because in the 1890s there was like a bandwagon effect, and everybody just kept this nebular hypothesis. They didn't realize that it was falsified in the 1920s. But somehow we still keep the mainstream astronomers still keep the idea that the nebular hypothesis is how objects or solar systems form. Good thing we have the Kepler, because we found out that that isn't exactly true. And we know the Kepler is changing all this stuff, and exoplanets are changing all this, because it says here on page 167, by the 1980s, theoretical astrophysicists using computer models had derived a general theory of the origin of the solar system that, though more sophisticated than those of Kant, Laplace, or Jeans, resembles them at least superficially. The new model envisions the sun congealing from a nebular cloud, the remnants which formed from a flattened disk that condensed as it cooled into a multitude of little chunks of material or planetesimals, which in turn collided to form the planets. They say they replaced it with a better theory with computer models, but it's the same theory, the nebular hypothesis, regurgitated over again. And we know this is the same thing because that's exactly what they assumed to be happening. They just said it over with different words and just put fancy wording in there like more sophisticated, And, oh, well, this is not superficial, you know. It is superficial because they don't understand what happens to stars as they evolve. They never did until now, and the Kepler found all these ancient stars that are doing weird things that should be impossible according to their nebular hypothesis. Not only that, but they don't realize that the nebular hypothesis, it was never a theory of planet formation to begin with. It was a theory of star birth. And it was a theory that the galaxies were new solar systems. The nebular hypothesis had a galaxy as a new solar system. It was never supposed to be for explaining how Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, or Earth, or Mercury, or Mars, or Venus formed. It was never designed to do that. It was just designed to explain away the hundreds of thousands of objects that they were finding, knowing full well that they didn't realize they were entire galaxies. And it says it in this book. But, you know, are they going to correct themselves? I don't know. It's up to me to try to explain it now in the new, inside of Stellar Metamorphosis, the more correct version of events. Oh, that's about it. I found this book at the library for $1. Later.